Deputy McConalogue.
Well, Myra and Cahirla, thank you for having this matter raised here today as topical issues. And I think all of our thoughts are with the many homes and businesses which actually have suffered serious flooding over the last weekend, and it was a very traumatic time for many people, and unfortunately it was the second time in a number of weeks for many of those people who've had to actually suffer this type of an event. And I want to commend those who worked so hard over the weekend, Donegal County Council in my own county, the fire service, the army who came in to help out, the ESB, and indeed members of the local community who turned up and volunteered with their neighbours to help address the businesses and homes and try and do their best to prevent the flooding which was taking place. Across Donegal, we had very severe instances of it, in some cases unlike what has been seen for many, many years. Towns such as Lifford, Ballindrate, Claudy, Castlefin, Kilmacrennan, Glenties, Pettigo all suffered very serious flooding instances, as indeed did many other towns and villages to greater and lesser extents. And what we need to see now, Taoiseach, and I hope you will be able to give assurance to the public today, is a compensation scheme which can help those people who are in tremendous distress financially, and also in terms of the task that is facing them, trying to remedy it. Compensation, Minister, which is accessible to them and which is appropriate for the type of damage which they have experienced. And also then, we need to see prevention measures expedited to try and ensure that we don't see repeats of this situation. We obviously can't stop the rain falling out of the sky, but we need to do everything within our power to ensure that lessons are learned in terms of previous flooding patterns and appropriate defences are put in place to try and prevent flooding where it is preventable, and in many cases it will be, and also to ensure that we are prepared for such instances in the future, and any lessons that can be learned from the last number of weeks are indeed learned, so that people don't continue to have to fear a repeat of this type of experience again.
I'd be grateful if that information, if the contact was made with the Community Welfare Service. The staff at the moment are assessing meeting demands for assistance by the public as the needs arise, and where necessary we're visiting the homes of people who are affected. This is happening in the Athlone area, where the departmental officials are in constant contact with Westmeath County Council and will provide whatever supports are required, and indeed in all of the other counties. And we are conscious of the fact, as has been referred to by a number of deputies, that there's a watch going on as to when more of the runoff water finds itself perhaps in coming off the Shannon and other rivers and into people's homes. Just let me say, in relation to the emergency humanitarian assistance, which the Department is very experienced at providing, I want to assure people it's not bureaucratic, it's not difficult to do. We've had very difficult situations. One of the biggest ones was in John's Island in Limerick, and literally we went door to door and established emergency premises. We will do that as required again, as close to the people affected as possible. And we have an overall allocation of up to 10 million over the last number of years to expend, so we can meet all of the assistance requirements as they arise. We do it roughly in 3 stages. The first is to provide emergency income support payments. That's food, generally for foods, for clothing and for personal items in the immediate aftermath of the event. Generally speaking, we're talking about relatively small amounts, from 100 to 500 or 600 euros, depending on the size of the family. Stage 2 generally involves the replacement of white goods, basic furniture items and other essential household items. Generally speaking, it's not until the floodwaters have receded somewhat that we're able to establish the full extent of the damage to the homes and what levels of replacement are required. And deputies with experience of flooding will know what I'm talking about. Stage 3 then is to identify what longer-term financial support or works are required, and that may take several months before this stage commences, because again you're talking about the house drying out, you may be talking about getting expert advice and assistance, you referred to the bridge maybe having to be replaced, and obviously that's a matter for people like structural engineers. Similarly with houses, and we have dealt with this situation, and in conjunction with the OPW and with the local authorities.
I must ask you to conclude. You will have an opportunity to come back in.
And by the way, there isn't a limit set on the scheme. It depends on what the needs of the household are.
Thank you, Taoiseach, for your reply. I think the crucial thing now is that actually on the ground, those who are affected by the flooding actually can see how it is they can access the compensation fund, and that it is made easy for them to do so, and that actually they can be assisted as best as possible, and that the already complicated situation facing them is not made more difficult by indeed the way that they engage with local services. Also, I think it's crucial that the decision in relation to the access to a fund by businesses is made promptly. I don't think that is something that can be allowed to drag, and it's a decision that they deserve to be made and not to be left in limbo in relation to that, Taoiseach. Also, can I say, and Minister Harrison, responsible for the OPW, is beside you, the crucial necessity now to ensure that remaining CFRAM reports, flooding reports, are actually expedited in key areas. I raised just a few weeks ago the issue of the CFRAM report, of the flooding report for Letterkenny, for Raphoe and for Melton, areas which were flooded previously, and for which those reports are required in order to actually make recommendations on the remediation works that are possible in relation to it. And another point I would make to you, Minister Harris, and it's one which two of my councillors have raised before, Councillor Patrick McGowan and Councillor Jay Crawford, in relation to the responsibility for the River Finn in County Donegal. Ballybofey and Urler experienced very bad flooding over the weekend, as did many of the towns along the Finn, and there is confusion there as to who exactly is responsible for maintaining the Finn and carrying out works on it. And I think that's something that the OPW would ask yourself to look into, to bring clarity to that.
Thanks,
so that there is an agency who's a lead agency in terms of taking responsibility for trying to address and put in place proposals as to how that can be remediated.
Taoiseach, you've 2 minutes now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, in relation to small businesses and the development of a €5 million fund to assist such small businesses, particularly, as people have said, in the run-up to Christmas, when many of them were anticipating a very active and successful Christmas season. That fund will be administered on behalf of the government through the Red Cross, and that will allow for maximum flexibility of the type described by a number of deputies. And clearly, as with our own humanitarian assistance scheme in social welfare, it is highly flexible. We have sorted out many issues in relation to housing and locating homes, if people have to be relocated, as close as possible to where they were, but out of flood danger. Obviously, there are issues, Deputy, of places where, unfortunately, in the past, some homes were built on floodplains. I certainly worked, when I became Minister, to sort out quite a few of the issues arising from the terrible things that happened in the 2009 floods and rains. And ultimately, we were able to assist almost all of the families. But nonetheless, it's an incredibly difficult thing for a family. I think I met most of the people affected. I've been in most of the flood locations right around the country where flooding has been experienced. And what I can say is that the Department of Social Welfare officials, particularly the Community Welfare Service, is on standby, has been on standby with no particular public fanfare. We have already been addressing issues that arose in recent times in both Waterford and Clare. As I said, over the weekend, our officials were out on the ground in Tralee, sorting out and relocating families, as well as setting up a humanitarian assistance for families. I would just say to you, Deputy, and I understand in Athlone and indeed further up the Shannon, people are obviously incredibly apprehensive. So too are people further down in Limerick, all of whom have experienced dreadful flooding before. We're on standby to address that and we work through the local agencies. Any advice or information, for instance, that we receive from other organisations, including the Society of St Vincent de Paul, we act on absolutely immediately, and we have made the process as simple as possible. But do bear in mind, in a flood, it may not be possible to identify instantly everything that arises, either in relation to the business or indeed in relation to the family home. So we concentrate in the first stage on emergency payments, in the second stage on essentials like white goods, fridges and so on that may have been destroyed, and in the third stage, when we have got some expert assessments on what needs to be rebuilt. And obviously, of course, if people have their own private insurance, well then those people generally go and look after themselves. But I'm conscious of the fact, because of the history of flooding, we're talking about a lot of people who don't have insurance. But that's where, in fact, the flood schemes and indeed the humanitarian relief scheme really comes into its own.